Welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. On this episode, popular guest Kristina Rogers, Global Consumer Leader EY, is back on the podcast to discuss the latest global and Canadian consumer insights in the 14th edition of her seminal research project, the Future Consumer Index. Launched in the early days of the COVID era, her research continues to track consumers' changing patterns and behaviors with echoes of pandemic shopping impacts and changes in how we live, consume media, and shop. Let's listen in now. Kristina, welcome back to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And I'm wondering if I'm going to get a watch this time around or
It is
something like that.
Well, just wait for that knock on the door. There's a smoking jacket on your way, a dinner jacket. This is the fourth appearance on the show. So you are... Well,
and in fact, to be honest, Michael, I'm including the impromptu one from 2018 back in Vancouver.
That's true.
So that's why I'm saying this is actually, fifth time. This is just, we're more organized now.
That's right. Well, you keep putting out great content. You're going to keep getting back on as a guest. Let's just lay that out. And you're such an insightful person, and so thank you again for agreeing to come back and share. Now, my listeners probably know who you are, but let's not assume that they've heard any. So spend a minute, tell me who you are, what you do for a living, and who you work for, and what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a delight to be back. I am the global consumer leader at EY. And so what does that mean? That means I work mostly to think about the future. So what do we need to be doing? What do we need to be building? What do we need to know about so that we can ensure that we are ready to work with our clients to help them see that future, understand what they need to be doing, whether that's, acquisitions or new strategy or, different things in their supply chain or what have you, and bring sort of the best of EY to our consumer products and retail clients. And so in that vein, part of the work I do is really researching consumers and looking at where are we going as consumers, as people, how will we be living in the future, what will we be doing? And in the case of some of the work we do, some of the research we do, it's what are we doing now? And then how do we think about that and what it means for what our clients need to be doing? So it's quite a fun job. It's nice to work with people in different parts of the world. And so I'm appreciative of being back.
Well, fantastic. And the Future Consumer Index, what do I have this right? Is this the 14th wave of the index?
Yeah.
Do I have that number right?
Yeah, so it's the 14th wave. And so you're right. I mean, this was sort of a little project I launched in April 2020. And you might remember that date. We all sort of went into hiding. And I really wanted to understand just how we would change because it was clear that was going to be impetus for significant change in our lives. And so we did track that related to the pandemic for, kind of a number of times in the marketplace with our research. But then I wanted to evolve it into just continuing to learn because I felt like there's something we learned back in 2020 and early 21, but where's it all taking us? And so continued to find the budget and the people to really drive this work and look at it and say, what do we have to say about it? So it's been really fun and exciting.
Now, if you reflect back on the iteration since COVID, I mean, COVID was, as you say, the impetus for many interesting things. This being one of them. But, consumers, it's a very dynamic environment, whether it's inflation or food affordability or regulation or the environment. And we can go on. We're going to talk about social media and how consumers view that. But if you sit back and think about how this project, if we can call it a project, has influenced your clients or how they think about the consumers, do they think about consumers more now? Because I feel like you can kind of get in a place where there's not much change going on, 0.5% here, 0.5% there. That's not really going to change my strategy. Have you opened up the aperture for some of the clients and saying, wow, there's a lot going on underneath the water waves?
We have. And I think that's because, there's been 4 years where we've really changed as consumers, as people, as individuals, as citizens. And so there's a real arc that we're seeing in our research from our fears in 2020 to what we're seeing now, which is, more independence. If I could choose 3 words to describe, I would say an average consumer around the world in our research, which covers 30 countries. I would say resilient, adaptive, and evaluating. So resilient in kind of the way you're describing it. We've been through a lot: COVID, supply chain shocks, geopolitical issues, climate events, inflation, technology evolution. And we're now saying, we've got this. Throw something else at me. And adaptive. We're adapting to technology. We're exploring new brands. We have different ways of shopping, different ways of wanting our needs served. And then just constantly evaluating. So working with technology differently. We don't do what our parents did. We don't buy the brands they did. And I'm weighing my choices. So that's really come thick and fast for our clients to really understand how we as consumers and their target segments are changing and what they need to do to adapt to win our money and our loyalty.
It's a super interesting insight, because I was looking at some data that Dr. Sylvain Charlebois sent me, my podcast partner on The Food Professor.
I know the podcast, and I follow him too.
He was putting up this chart that showed in Canada, we are actually the big grocers, because that's primarily who feeds up into Stats Canada, had actually sold the same amount of food in 2017 when we had 35 million people. Now we have 41 million people. So, I mean, there's a couple of big takeaways from that. One of which was, there's a lot of different places to buy brands and food than there were years ago. Like, I think some of that's not tracked, whether it's a Dollarama or an Amazon or whatever. How do you and the brands think about that? Because they're kind of looking at, is it too many places, too many times? I'm sure this is happening around the world, but trying to understand and keep track of what consumers are doing, looking at traditional metrics, feels like it's getting harder than easier.
Oh, I would agree with that statement. I think, especially given, we have, the explosion of younger generations who are now coming into their own in terms of having some money and spending, and certainly the older Gen Z generation are household owners, or at least in charge of a budget for a household, let's say. And so I think you're right. I mean, the proliferation of places where we can buy things, the one-off things, that idea of creating a weekly or biweekly shopping list and going to one location and hoping we could get it all there. I mean, that's truly gone by the wayside. And so if anyone's looking to measure it from just the big grocers and where we're, finding things, I do. But I also would say that consumers, at least in our research, they're pulling back. They're evaluating what they truly need. They want less waste. They, are just doing things slightly differently. So there's probably a blend in some of those numbers around just our behavior in terms of what we want to, purchase and what we've said we don't actually need. And then all the different ways that we are finding and buying different food products or products in general.
What confuses me a little bit is I'm not confident that I know whether that's the current state of how many, there's way more trip occasions happening. And I'm not, let's just talk about grocery brands. There's way more trip occasions happening. They're shopping at way more retailers. And I'm not convinced, or I'm not sure that it's not just value seeking, right? Hey, food affordability is tough. I'm going to shop a bunch of stores to get them at best value. That might recede. Or is this a permanent means, change of behavior that was inculcated during COVID? Like COVID, you had to go to different places because you were trying to find, some people were out of stock. So I'm trying to get a sense of, and I'd love to hear your thoughts if we've seen kind of a big change in consumer behavior back to multiple seeking of deals or multiple seeking of stuff from multiple retailers and multiple occasions, or if this is a kind of point in time based on a value seeking behavior on food affordability.
Certainly there's a segment of the population that just out of necessity, right, their household finances, they would be having to do that. But when I think, if I reflect on just some of the research we have and the way consumers express themselves, I do think consumers are, the ones who are just tired and they're exhausted, and they are, anything that's convenient or helps solve a problem, they're happy to do. So maybe that's shopping for a few things online, or they happen to pass a place where they know they need a few things. And I do think in the U.S., I don't know what's happening in Canada, Michael, but in the U.S., some of the delivery charges are actually going down now. And so it's making it a little easy. And you can combine things if you're using certain delivery apps with no charge. I don't know if that's good for the person, doing the shopping or doing the delivering, but you can easily just shop kind of all the time if you want to. And so that means you're getting things from all over the place.
There's really mixed, just to follow up on that thread about what's happening here, I'll give you a data point or whatever. The Sobeys had done a big deal with Ocado for a big bet, basically, on the growth of e-commerce. And they just announced they're pulling back from that. And that the consumers have just not done grocery shopping in any way that they thought they would. And what strikes me as interesting, and maybe there's something in the data, or maybe we can get back to this in another episode another time, but it's not, I don't think, some people think it's money, like it's expensive to have stuff delivered versus go there yourself. I don't buy that at all, because millions and millions of people pay for Prime or pay for a Costco membership. I think there's something else going on in Canada. I don't know what it is, but I know in the States there's 24/7 DoorDash or whatever. Here you have that, but people just don't seem to be interested. Like, I'm not convinced it's a dollar thing. They just don't seem to be interested. You see that going on.
The habits have not been established for doing so. I think here they are very much entrenched and established now.
Okay, you put it down to habits.
I don't know what is different. I mean, we're both Canadians. You're there, I'm not. But what is different? And maybe it's just feeling like that's extravagant. That I could see. Yeah. This is an extravagant behavior. That's not necessarily the national psyche to be that extravagant. So who knows?
I'll tell you in the fall. I'm doing some research on it. So I'll tell you in the fall, because I've got a bunch of different hypotheses. That being a good one, actually. That's a good one. It just doesn't feel right. Just doesn't feel right to do this thing.
Yeah, because you can go way back into rabbit hole on that one and say, well, what about the person driving, and who did my shopping? Are they being properly compensated? Like, how does this work? And so...
Yeah. Well, anyway, all right. We down a little rabbit hole. Speaking of which, now you this whole idea of resilience really kind of surprised me that in your data, 61% of consumers feel in control of their lives. 47% are optimistic. Boy, when you look at the headlines, certainly as in the circular mirror of the platforms, it doesn't feel like 61% of consumers are feeling like they have control of their lives. But your survey really put some truth to that, eh?
It did, and I do. It does get back to that, the resiliency that I mentioned. I'm just making some inferences here, Michael. Sure. I mean, we look at the data and we try to see what do we think. I mean, we've been through
your clients' inferences too, because you're presenting this data to people. I'm sure everybody looks around and says, what do you think's going on?
What the heck is happening here? What does this mean? And so part of it, I do think, is there's been so much thrown at us as people, consumers, and individuals, that we've kind of adapted to this is just constant, and companies too. I mean, I talk to CEOs and our clients, and they're kind of resigned to nothing. We keep talking about these, unusual times. I just want some usual times. Like, what happened to those? So I think that's happening, in the consumer space too. I mean, there's just sort of we're resigned to, life is not as stable as it was, years ago. We're not, living the life that our parents did, or et cetera. So I think there's just acceptance of that. But then with that, it kind of says, okay, there's some uncontrollable things that are out there. I can manage that the best I can, but what can I take control over?
Right.
So my finances, my buying choices, how and where I spend my money, who I listen to and trust. And actually, I think trust, will be a big element of our discussion today. But I really do think it's, if we go back to some of our earlier research, so I don't know if it was sort of, back in wave, 8 or 9, we really saw that consumers were not, we did not trust institutions at that moment. And they don't. And in fact, that included companies, brands, and retailers. And they fared a little better. But, there is this notion that there's not a lot of big institutions to trust out there. So I've got myself, and that's who I can rely on. And I guess that's the way I'm interpreting some of this, because we're just seeing a lot more kind of authority, consumers taking a lot more authority and independence in terms of how they, spend their money, what they need to do to get get by if they're worried about their finances, and just, really getting in the driver's seats of things they can control.
There seems to be the big headline quote in the research, and I'll put a link to the research, this episode or this edition in the show notes. The quote that you pulled out: "I trust the views of my peers, not what brands said." What went wrong? Like, I have had consumers say, I'm mad at brands for things like shrinkflation, right? They're selling me the same price for the same product, but there's way less. Like,
yes.
where did brands go wrong here? Because brands used to have some trust and some authority. I think they still do, but your survey,
still do.
Your surveys, clearly there's a lot of growing influence of the power of social media influencers, which is good for me, by the way, since I have a barbecue show for all the listeners. I'm a bit of an influencer.
That's right, and I've listened to that a few times, so I need to get my game up on that.
I love your research. I love your research, by the way. Keep it coming.
There we go.
What do you think because I partner with brands, and brands kind of like my content, and they seem to do good things.
Michael.
Yeah.
That's it, isn't it? So I do think that a lot of this has transpired over the last few years. So, we were told for a long time that national brands were better. They had better attributes. They were, they were more efficacy. There was more efficacy.
Yeah.
And then, we got into this thing, well, I better try some store brands or private label, stockouts, and so on. And so, we tried new things and we said, oh, this is fine. And it's a lot cheaper. So, why do I need to go back to that? But then I think, to your point about, and I think you're right, you're an influencer in the space that you operate in, in the barbecue space. People who like that, who are influenced by it, they find real authenticity in that influencer. And my daughter just turned 21 this week, and we've had a number of conversations about this. I've talked to clients about it. And, it certainly is that there is a level of trust and a belief that if you show me using products in your own home and you like it, and I see that, if it's a hair product, your hair looks great, well then, that's all I need to know. And so it's really a challenge, I think, for brands to figure out, okay, we see that this is that's not like a nascent trend. This is happening now.
Yeah.
Right. And so how do we, who do we partner with? How do we, make sure that our brand is managed? If we're partnering someone, that person also has a huge amount of power to say no, because, the influencers, they're the brand for a certain segment of people, and that's who their followers trust.
And they're the product development. They're the product development too. I was chatting with somebody from McDonald's, and there was this influencer who created a particular burger, which was kind of fun, a mix of beef and chicken, and they said, "Well, let's put that on the menu." Like your product development, innovative product development, it's happening from the influencer community. It's so interesting. Like I'm looking at some generational stats on your report, and what I noted reasons why consumers follow an influencer by generation. What I noticed is there's differences from Gen X to Millennial to Gen Z and Baby Boomer, but the broad strokes are very, very similar. Like the top thing that people are looking for is make content I find valuable, and the least important thing pretty much to everybody is someone I find aspirational. So interesting. Speak to that a little bit more. Were you surprised by anything you saw there that they want the content? They're less worried about other things. They said, make content that I'm interested in and I'll follow you. Is any of that surprise you?
I certainly not for younger people, in that, they're looking for entertainment. So, this is where, you have the media entertainment, gamification of many things. And so anybody who they're following and are interested in understanding, does that person, use these products or why would I use them? I mean, they want to hear your experience with using those things and using it in your home or on your balcony or whatever the person is doing. And so it has to be somewhat addictive in that you want to go back and listen to this person. You trust them. They're authentic. They make you laugh. I mean, it's quite interesting. They're almost like the whole, media and advertising world kind of rolled up into one because they're really doing the whole job. And so I'm not surprised by that. Certainly for the younger people, this is who they trust. This is who they believe because they see the products in action, in content, and they feel that that's where they can go for real information.
Well, it's interesting because even the spread isn't wildly different. I mean, makes content I find enjoyable. Baby boomers 41% and Gen Z 46%. I mean, it's not like
and I did find that surprising. Yeah. I mean, I'm wondering who the baby boomers are. I'd have to really go back and look at that in different areas of the world to see who, because I know that's not too many baby boomers I know who are looking at that content, but I see it in my own home with the younger people around. Interesting.
All right, well, let's talk about, following on this, we see a couple other things like 61% of consumers are engaged with influencers, but only 21% are clicking on ads in social media platforms. Pull this all together for us, this kind of particular thread, and what's your advice to the brands out there? How do they, I guess it's a matter of scale too, right? Do you have partnerships with third parties that help you manage a lot of influencers? You can pick the big strategy. You can back Kim Kardashian and for $1 billion or whatever, or you can find little micro influencers like me. But then there's a cost to managing, small influencers.
Oh, absolutely.
How are they thinking about it? What's your advice?
Well, you asked about the ads on social media. I do think that's waning in terms of any real efficacy. Clicking on ads can be mindless and not very intentional. And we know that, if an individual clicks once and doesn't find it relevant, they never go back to it, yet they may see it, many, many more times. And so there's not a great job being done there in terms of really targeting, what is relevant and whether there's even any, it's very passive. And so the interesting thing about, working with influencers is very active. I want to be there. I enjoy, seeing that person. But, to your point, what's the strategy? And I think some of our clients are really scrambling in a way to just understand where it's necessary, who's out there that would really align with their brand values, the heritage, because that's a big part of it too. To your point, if you've got, multiple, how, you've really got to keep on top of that because your brand could be ruined if you do not have the right oversight and really having to, see. So to your point, it's who's your audience and how micro do you need to go? Yeah. And so, I wonder because, maybe this young woman, I've seen her many, many times, Alex Earl, she has millions of followers and they see her as authentic and likable and she can move any product from soft drinks to hair products. It doesn't need to be that micro. They just believe her and trust her. Yeah. And so it really depends, I think, on the category and the brand, the scale, to your point. I mean, what are you trying to move in terms of volume? Yeah. And, who's best placed to do that? And I think, I'm not sure that the global, retailers or CP companies yet really have a effective way of figuring this out.
Notice, by the way, how I put myself and Kim Kardashian in the same category, right? You see that?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah, we're
aspiration. Everyone needs an aspiration, Michael.
That's right. All right, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about data security. So I'm of two minds of data security and cyber breaches. Your report says 61% of consumers are worried about ID theft and data breaches, but who's not worried about it? But on the other hand, I got like 3 letters last week alone. Like it happens so often.
Michael, I got 2. I got 2 letters this week.
Right. Yeah. So I'm start to thinking about, we were talking about crisis management with a client, and I'm like, I think we've gone past if you have a cyber incident, that's very hard on your brand. Because I think it happens to everybody's brand almost, or it's going to happen or whatever. There's been major ones with major retailers in Canada. I mean, and then you get like Ticketmaster that's just mammoth. And so I said maybe we should think more about crisis response than, hey, it's a brand. Hey, listen, we got hit. Everybody gets hit. It's kind of like getting COVID these days. Everybody gets it. Don't worry about it. But how you deal with it and how brands should measure their response to it. And it feels like if I tie a bunch of these things together in your survey, that if you try to hide it for some period of time, which is kind of going back to some old bad practices, that's really going to punish you. How are you thinking about how your clients react to these cyber breaches, given people are still very concerned about it?
Yeah, indeed. And I'm of the same mind as you. I received 2 notices this week, sell company Ticketmaster, as you said. And so it is unavoidable. And I do think we've come to expect it. So everything you said, I would completely agree with. And I think working with clients, obviously as EY, we take that very seriously with, all of the auditing and financial work we do. But in terms of our clients, I mean, they're very aware that they, to your point, need to do their best to protect their customers, consumers, and invest and back up the claims that they're making in terms of, how safe and secure your data is. But at the end of the day, a lot of the work that's being done truly is contingency planning. So, we know this will happen at some point.
Right.
What are we going to do about it when it does? What's the best messaging? And how do we know the scale of it is, just a few phone numbers went out, or no, your social insurance number and is disappeared into the ether. So I think, there's a lot of the work that's being done now is really what do we do when it happens, not how do we stop it from happening. So completely agree with you on that. And I do think consumers understand that too. We know we're sharing data, habits, phone records. I mean, I think we've come to terms with that's how our society operates. And so while we did learn that consumers are concerned about it, nobody wants their identity stolen. That's a whole different level. Yeah. And they're worried about data breaches. But you're right. I mean, I've also seen throughout the time we've been doing this work that the temperature has really come down in terms of being worried about stolen data and things like that. If I think back to some of this research 3 years ago, I do feel like people just see it as inevitability, but they don't want to be harmed, and they want companies to be taking care of it when it happens.
And be accountable, right? And be accountable in some way.
Yeah, be upfront, to your point. I mean, if you want to build trust with us, tell us what's going on and what you're doing about it.
So in the least interesting and least surprising data from your survey was 67% of consumers love free shipping. That's been true for decades, and nobody can shake that loose. But you talk about it in the context of loyalty. What's your advice around what is going to make a difference from loyalty programs? There's points-based, and is it the soft benefits? What is it that can really make loyalty programs shine, according to your research and how you're seeing consumers?
Yeah, and actually that's the great question for me, because we've been working on some of this over the last couple of months with a few big clients. And I think what we've been discussing is really coming to terms with loyalty has become somewhat transactional. So consumers know they're giving companies something valuable. So as we said earlier, my data, you can track my habits, you know what I'm doing. And so if you want me to return and you want to keep my business, you need to use that and understand what's important to me and then truly deliver on it. And so I think, loyalty used to be, we'll give you some points and we hope you come back. And of course you will, because you've built up. No, now consumers are saying, you give me what I tell you I want, and I'll keep returning. And so there's a lot more to your point earlier about, being involved in the co-creation of product process. This is happening here too, where consumers are saying, I know you know all about me. So make this worth my while, and I'll be loyal to you.
Or conversely, if you keep sending me these generic things, like I got one from a company that should know way, way better, and sent me, hey, here's a 19-year-old influencer you might like to follow. I'm like, I don't think so. Like, how did you get that wrong?
And that's exactly. That's what that's perfect, because that's the thing that we're all coming to realize, and certainly our research shows that, and it's the type of conversations we're having with our clients. The amount of data they have, our clients have, whoever that was has, they know, but they're not using it effectively. So there's got to be a huge investment in just how do we, figure out how to join up all this data? How do we get to know Michael better? How do we know exactly what to do with him, what he, wants? And so if it's only free shipping, then we better be able to deliver on that, or Michael will probably go away. And so
that feels like table stakes now. Doesn't that feel like table stakes to me? I like what's the differentiator, I think, is what you're trying to get at.
Yeah, and I do think we're coming to expect much more personalization in that conversation with our customer experience. So, you really need to know me as a company, and understand me and bring me things that feel like you do know me. And I think that's it's going to be hard for our clients, because how do you drive personalization at scale? And so,
two letters keep coming at me. I'm not sure I'm convinced about it. Of course, AI. It's been how many minutes have we not said the words AI in retail conversation.
You brought it up, Michael. We made it through right up until now.
We almost got through, but I couldn't help myself. That's supposed to be the promise of AI, right? Is suddenly it's gonna be the superpower that's going to enable all this. Are you buying that?
I mean, maybe in the future, but I have to tell you, over the last year, working with clients, especially in retail and consumer products, who are, of course, looking at AI and they see the promise of it. But part of the challenge, I do think, is that, at least what I've seen so far, is that without massive investment, it gets you to like 90%. So if this is anything financial, or if it's anything that's personal, or 90% isn't enough.
No.
Right. It needs to get to 100%. But that investment in it's almost like last mile delivery. That investment in the last mile to make this actually work the way you'd be happy if you were, overseeing this as an executive in a company is really expensive. So then you're going to land up with you'll end up in the conversation with the CFO. What are we getting out of this? Why are we doing this? What's the investment case for this? So I do think it's going to take some time. Of course, there's going to be a lot of fun and dabbling with it and seeing what it can do to really either, do something interesting and innovative, or take out cost, whichever way you want to go, or both. But I feel like what I've been seeing is people, actually companies pulling back a little bit on some of their AI initiatives, simply because they want to have more oversight, especially where their brands are concerned. And they also want to make sure that the level of accuracy meets the standard that they have in their organization. And I think that's been a struggle that I've seen, in the last several months.
People want to get in touch with you. How do they reach out? I'll put a link to the this report, 14th Wave of the Future Consumer Index, in the show notes. But if they want to get a hold of you and tap into some of your wisdom and insights, how do they do that?
They can reach me on LinkedIn. They can reach me by email, Kristina Rogers 1@ey.com. Happy to field those too, either of those.
Fantastic. Well, as always, great conversation. Thanks again for taking time to come on the Voice Retail podcast. I look forward to, who knows, we might see each other. I'm going to be in your hometown in the fall, so maybe we'll actually get together again. Since Vancouver, it's been a long time. It'd be great to get a pic together for social media. Right there, you go. So we'll bring it all together.
And I'll be able to say I knew him when. Now he's taken over the barbecue influencer world, here I was. So
there you go.
Absolutely, Michael.
Well, listen, congratulations on the latest iteration of the report. Wish you much continued success, safe travels for the rest of summer and the fall, and thanks again for joining me on the pod.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Always look forward to it.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure to check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis and the Global E-Commerce Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, Senior Retail Advisor, Keynote Speaker, and Rethink Retail 2023 Global Top Retail Influencer. If you want more information, content, or to chat, follow me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.